Huh?
Everybody has something that turns them on. Each and
Okay.
Okay, we've taken Epiphany off of your...
off my list of vocabulary words.
No, because said to my wife there's certain words you're not supposed to use. She said to me, in England it's CH. I said, you're not supposed to say that.
Okay, anyway, so we what we learned yesterday, let's see how this all ends, right? How did this all end? So we'll understand what's going on here. It all ended.
This is not the
It all ended.
This is not the moment.
Yeah, you just took my page, that's all. It all ended when in Eretz Yisrael, when in the land of Israel, Binyamin is connected to who?
Yes.
No. As a Shevet, as a tribe. Who are they connected to? Who were they connected to?
The king of Israel.
Who? Which Shevet?
10 tribes.
No, Binyamin was not connected to the 10 tribes. That's the whole thing. He didn't go with Yosef. When the kingdom was split into two, you have the same balagan, you have the same problem.
Who was there?
And Binyamin went with
Yehuda.
And Binyamin went with Yehuda.
And Binyamin. Okay, you're confusing me. Okay.
Not confusing me. You know this. It's just... But the big deal is, it's not just that. It's also, this is intrinsic. Why did Binyamin go with Yehuda? Because in their territory is the temple.
That's what I just said.
I
said there was the two temples, and they were in the territory of half Binyamin and half Yehuda. They were in the middle there.
Not two temples, one temple.
The first and the second.
Okay.
But before that,
in the second temple there were no tribes.
Yosef was in Shiloh.
In the second temple there were no tribes anymore. So it's not part of the story.
I'm a tribe of Levi.
There were no tribes. Says just because you know who you are. The Binyamin was always attached to Yehuda. And this was also the situation here. And what we have here is Yosef trying to take Binyamin over to his side.
Okay.
So you see that this is a long-standing historical problem. It's not something that just awakened in this week's parsha that Yosef wants Binyamin. It's always been that way.
But you see that Binyamin also wanted Yosef from the way that he called his sons. Everything was to do with Yosef.
It's not the same thing. It was a memory. Here we're saying that he wants him physically. He wants him with him. He doesn't want him to be with Yehuda. That's what this is. So the Arizal has to give an explanation. What does this mean?
Did he care about the other tribes?
He cared about them. It's not the same thing. It's not the same problem. With Binyamin, he has a problem. So if you read the Torah externally, so what do you have? You have that he's his brother from his mother also, and that's why he's more connected to him. But the Arizal and the Alter Rebbe here, they're same issue. It's still a family issue. And we need to abstract this. What the Alter Rebbe is doing on the basis of the Arizal is to abstract this even further.
But didn't Yaakov put his ruach in the other three wives?
Yes, but here we're not talking about the other three wives.
No,
we're talking about just about Rachel. Because that's what Yosef is ostensibly interested in. So we said this is related to levirate marriage, the spirit that the husband puts into his wife. And this is what we call the lower tzaddik. Why is it the lower tzaddik? Because we said there's two types of connection between someone who gives and someone who receives. What's the first type? Mitzad atzmut shel hamkabel. Skip 2 lines. The first is from, we said yesterday, between a teacher and a student. So there's what I connect to my teacher because of what he's given me. Sorry, the first one is not because of what he's given me, because of the connection itself. Mitzad atzmut shel hamkabel. The woman is drawn to her husband. The student is drawn to a teacher. He wants someone, he looks for someone that he says, this is who I want to learn from.
That's ruchni.
So at that moment, you see that the bond between them has some element that is even before they meet. It's some passion that the student has for the teacher from himself. And that's called velishech chukatech mitzad atzma. Even before they met. That's why the woman recognizes her husband. That's why the student recognizes the teacher. That's why we recognize God. Okay. It's the same thing. V'zenika alatman, and this was normally called in Kabbalah raising feminine waters. Aval madriga shenit, ma shetiyeh tshukata rak mitzad shel hashefa shushpa b'mikvar. The second type of passion, connection to the giver comes from what was given to me. The very fact that I was given something, that creates a connection. ואף שקלטה והלכה לה נשאר בה בחינת רישים ממנו שמעורר אותה בתשוקת קבלה לקבל עוד שפע, and that's why she continues to want to be with her husband. Or we continue to want to be with Hashem, or the student continues to want to be with his teacher. זהו אינו מצד עצמה כלל, מפני שכל דבר חוזר למקורו. So the thing that was left inside, that's the rucha.
So if it's so,
and that wants to return to its source.
Ruchni, it doesn't make any sense. There can never be a get, either between a man and his teacher or between a man and his wife. It's so ruchni.
The sages say that when a person divorces his wife, the mizbeach cries. Why? What's mizbeach got anything to do with it? What does the mizbeach do?
Mizbeach is altar of peace.
So what?
Shalom.
What are we talking about here? That the mizbeach is something that returns something to its source.
The animals.
Right. With the fire, the important part about the mizbeach is not whether you put animals, sacrifices on it or not. The important part of the mizbeach is the eish, is the fire. And that's what it represents. And the fire is meant to return things to its source. So even if whether there's a sacrifice on it, not a sacrifice on it, doesn't matter. The real point is that with the fire going back up, you remember that you have a divine soul that wants to return to its source.
I thought we were burning the animal soul.
Again, because there's two ways of doing it. I can either...
Put your foot on the brakes or take your foot off the accelerator.
Right. So I can get rid of my animal soul. It's like sort of like a hot air balloon. You can take ballast off and throw some sandbags down. So that's getting rid of the animal soul. But the other thing is you can just heat the air up again. To heat the air up, you don't need to throw away anything. You don't need to sacrifice anything. And that's why in the future we won't need sacrifices.
Yeah.
People won't bring sacrifices. It'll be the regular daily avoda. The regular daily service. But in principle, we won't. Of course it will be a mizbeach, but all you need is the fire on it. That's what I'm saying. Because all you need to do is heat up the air. So the same thing is true when there's a connection between a husband and a wife. But meaning, there's always problems. There's always animal soul. There's always tension between a husband and wife. It almost can't be otherwise.
Your wife is perfect.
We're not human, but that's a different problem. Because I only know about these problems, thank God, from books and from people who come to cry it. Yeah. But there's always going to be problems. So there's always going to be an animal soul. So you can spend your time burning the animal soul. It's fine also. But the real point of marriage is the eish, is the eish of the shechina, not the fire that consumes them, which would be like consuming the sacrifice. It's the fire that is between them that is not a consuming fire. It's a heating fire. and it heats their relationship up, bringing them closer and closer to their godliness. And if they divorce, if they can't make the fire on the Mizbeach, just the fire, no sacrifices. The kids don't need to be a sacrifice. Nothing needs to be a sacrifice. Just the fire of the... Together we can serve Hashem. Separately we can't. So that's called that the Mizbeach sheds tears. Why does it shed tears? Because tears are water. It puts out the fire. It's like that instead of being a source of fire, it became a source of water. Water is also good, but it has to be the right type of water. Okay, anyway. So that's the second type of connection between the receiver and the giver. Because you've given me something. Good. And Binyamin is the thing that was given. He's not the passion in and of itself. So you could say that Yosef was the passion in and of itself. And Binyamin was more what she had been given from Yaakov. The spirit that Yaakov had put into her when they first consummated their marriage. מפני שכל דבר חוזר למקום, והרי רשימו מן השופע נשאר בה שחוזר למקומו, על כן תהיה תשוקתה וכו', וזה נקרא צדיק תחתון. And so Yosef is the tzaddik elyon. He is the sense of connection between Rachel and Yaakov that came from Rachel herself. And Binyamin is what Yaakov gave Rachel. So now these are called the higher foundation and the lower foundation. The higher tzaddik, the lower tzaddik. שהוא בחינת יסוד המשפיע, וזהו שחשק יוסף צדיק עליון, דרוח הדשביק מכבר תחזור אליו ותתקלל בו. So now he says, I want Binyamin back. Meaning, I'm not complete. If it's only the passion that I have,
Who's not complete?
Yosef. Because I'm the tzaddik elyon. I'm the passion in and of itself. Like Rachel's passion. Again, we're talking about the same passion that a person would have for Hashem. So it says, the passion I have for Hashem for myself, so that's very good. That's called Ma'im Nukvin. But Hashem also gave me something. Hashem gave me many, many things. It's like I look back at life and I say, why is my passion only from what my connection right now? I want all the things that He gave me over all the years of my life to also figure into my passion, to also figure into my connection with Hashem. I say it another way. It's when I learn Torah. Why is it that I only remember what I'm learning right now? I'd like to be able to remember everything I learned. I don't. Do you?
No.
Okay.
I remember what I learned.
So that's called tzaddik tachton.
I remember what I learned.
I don't remember what I learned. So it's a pain. It's a physical pain. If I would only remember also everything that I learned, everything that Hashem already gave me, how much more deliberate would be my connection with God. לכך אמר, ואשימה עיני עליו, כי ידוע שהעלאת מן של האישה על ידי הבנים שילדה לאישה, גדלה מאוד מעלאת מן עצמותה. So he says, because it's well known that the passion that comes from what the husband gave is greater than the passion she has by herself. Even though in terms of height, in terms of originality, the passion that comes from herself, from the receiver's, Rachel, the receiver. The receiver's passion from himself is greater, it's higher, it's called. But it's not as strong as the passion that he has from receiving a gift. That's why it's so important to give gifts. Because when you give a gift, you're creating a passion that's stronger than the original passion. Even though the original passion is higher because it's pure. It's just that I'm drawn to you. The student says, I just love my teacher, that's all. But the passion that I have from what he's given me is more intense. It's not as pure, but it's more intense. It's not as pure because he would say, but it's sort of like a bribe, right? I gave you something and now you love me back. No big deal. Still, as much as it's not as pure, it's more intense. וכמו שכתוב בעץ חיים, as it says, all this is explained in עץ חיים. והוא מהטעם הנ"ל, and so on, and so on. Okay. והנה יהודה רצה, so I'm skipping the second paragraph. והנה יהודה רצה לעלותו ליעקב אביו, דווקא ביות כי טען שנותרו לבדו לאמו ואביו האבו, פירוש כי יעקב הוא בחינת חוכמה עצמית בשורש הקו שלו האמצעי, שהוא בחינת דעת האבא, כי דעת תפארת יסוד הוא קו האמצעי כידוע. ולכך אמר, לא יוכל הנער לעזוב את אביו ומת, כי אין קישוי אלא לדעת. So he says, it's not so simple, Mr. Yosef. You can't have him. You can't have Yosef, who's the Rucha, who's the spirit that Yaakov gave to Rachel. Okay? Yehuda says, this spirit belongs where it belongs, where it came from.
Yaakov.
Yeah. Why? Because this spirit, if you take it, then the giver will no longer be able to give. If you take away, if you possess what you were given, okay, that you make it yours, that was the thing that connected them to begin with, the giver and the receiver.
But Yosef also had his own part of the Rucha, because it was the same mother.
Again, he had the essential connection between Rachel and Yaakov. Rachel loved Yaakov.
He was the Bachor.
But what we're saying is he represents and he has the intrinsic connection between them. And this would be like the intrinsic connection between me as a creation and God as a creator.
Is that why Yaakov loved Yosef most? No connection.
Why? No. I don't know if he loved him most. He showed him favors, but I don't think he loved him more than others. It doesn't say that he loved him.
What does Ben Sekulim? Says
They have
Yaakov. Loved him because he looked like him.
Okay. Yeah, he did. So again, that's because he looked like him. He saw himself in him, but not because of Rachel. But Binyamin he loved because of Rachel, because she was. He represented the spirit that he had put into her. Meaning that he represented the investment he made in Rachel.
Didn't that disappear when she died?
No, on the contrary, that's what Binyamin is. That's what he's going to say. That's what he said a second ago. He said that he was born at the moment that she perished. So that was like normally it's just the last child takes out the rucha, takes back the spirit. In this case, there was no Rachel left. Usually the mother is left afterwards. And so there's still the intrinsic connection between them. But again, what is he saying here? He's saying that Yaakov, his relationship with Binyamin is because that's what represents his passion for Rachel. Right? Because that's the Rucha, that's the spirit that he put into her. So he says here, it's like that there can't be cohabitation without consciousness, without da'at. Yaakov himself is not da'at. Yaakov is tiferes. He's the beauty, he's under da'at. But if there's no da'at, he couldn't have been with Rachel. He couldn't have impregnated her. Why? Because without consciousness, you can't impregnate. There's no cohabitation. It says, "En kishuy ela ladat." The male procreative organ does not become fertile until there's consciousness. It doesn't become. Again, it's so much so. He's going to say, I think, in a second, that if there was no dat, there was no consciousness, and therefore no awakening of the male organ, then there's no isser sometimes in certain things. At least, not no isser, but there's no punishment. There's no punishment. But it's not. Right. So that erection is dependent on consciousness. So he says the same thing is when you think about it abstractly, that Yaakov's whole connection to Rachel is because of she awakens his consciousness. Again, that's like called that if we use the teacher and student, so we would say the teacher becomes more interested in the subject matter because of the student. He awakens, his mind awakens, and he becomes fertile in his thinking because there's a student. If there's no student, when he's thinking just to himself, it's not as fertile. It doesn't, not as much comes out. So he says he needs Binyamin. He needs that thing that he gave Rachel, because that thing that he gave Rachel, that's what gives him his awakening from above. He can't function. The whole middle axis of the Sfirot can't function if you take Binyamin away. Okay? So now let's see. והיינו עבר חי דווקא, והדעת שמחמתו התקשר, עדיין לא נמשך פנימיות השפע כלל. אך עם כל זה יש בקישוי מעין הפנימיות, והוא הדעת והרגשה. Fifth line.
You were on the first line a second.
Okay, read again. ולכן אמר לו יוכל נער לעזוב את אביו ומת, כי אין קישוי אלא לדעת. וכשמסלק הדעת והמחשבה, הרי העבר מת. So, the fact that he'll leave Yaakov will cause Yaakov to die. What does it mean he'll die? Abstractly, it means he won't be fertile anymore. He won't be able to draw down the infinite light. And Yaakov, Tiferes, the male principle in the Sfirot, won't be able to draw down infinite light anymore. And we'll all suffer. Yehuda is saying, he's a Malchus, he's all the way in the bottom. He's saying, if you take Binyamin to you, instead of leaving him for Yaakov, then what you're going to do is you're going to make all of us suffer, because the whole middle axis is not going to function. There will be no feeling of infinite light in everything that we do. וידוע שיש בחינה פנימיות יסוד שהוא השפע עצמה, וחיצוניות השפע הוא הכלי שדרך בו תעבור השפע. And Yesod itself, foundation, has two aspects to it. So you too, Yosef, you'll also lose your inner awakening, because your inner awakening is also dependent on Yaakov. Don't think that you'll be out of a mess. You'll be in the same mess that we are. והיינו איבר חי דווקא, והדעת שמחמתו יתקשר, עדיין לא נמשך פנימיות השפע כלל. אך עם כל זה, יש בקישוי מעין הפנימיות, והוא הדעת וההרגשה. So he says, it's not enough. You would say that until there's procreation, cohabitation itself, so there's no shefa yet. There's nothing really being produced. We would say there's no shichvat zera. There's no seed yet. So what are you talking about? It says, no, just the fact that it hardens, just the fact that there's the erection here, that itself is already awakening. What would that mean? It would mean in this case, you have to abstract it. Okay? The very fact that there is a memory of something that I gave once. The person remembers, let's say he's a teacher, and he remembers I gave a very good class here. That itself, the memory of it again. He doesn't have to have the class in front of him, he doesn't have to have the people in front of him, doesn't need all of that. Even just the awakening that happens by remembering that I once gave a very good class here, that itself already causes consciousness to come down, knowledge to come down. That itself, it's an awakening. It invigorates the person to begin to bring the infinite light down. אבל משמש מת באריות פטור. פירוש אף שיצא פנימיות השפע, אם לא הייתה דרך עבר חי אינו כלום. But the opposite is also the problem. What if there was shefa, meaning there was seed coming out, but there was no awakening? It wasn't with an erection as well. Okay? There was nothing drawing the person to do this. So that's nothing. Even if he was with somebody who was forbidden. It's like nothing happened. It's still forbidden. But there's no punishment for it. והדרך משל זה יובן שיוסף היה מבחינה פנימיות יסוד. ולכן נקרא בין זיכונים פירוש טיפה רוחנית שאין ככה ממקור בשור של כוח המשכיל כל ההשכלות נקרא זקן שקנה חוכמה. Yosef himself is not the external aspect of the foundation. He's the inner aspect of the foundation. We'll see in a moment what that means. Because he is the drop of semen of his father Yaakov. He is where everything comes from. That's why Yosef is higher than everybody else. ומה שכתוב ואחיו מת פירוש ששלטו בו שפע ינקות החיצונים להיותו במצרים. And the fact that they said about Yosef, right? The tribe said about Yosef, and his brother, meaning Benjamin's brother, is dead. Why is he dead? Because even though he's the drop of our father's consciousness, he's the drop of his mind, he's the one who understands everything. We knew he was the brightest of everybody, but he's dead, meaning when we look at it spiritually, because he's now within the klipa, he's in mochin de kadnut, we call it. He's in small-mindedness because he's surrounded by small people. He's surrounded by the tumah, the impurity of Egypt. Really what it means is that he went down, in the Kabbalah it means that he went down to the throat. The throat is Mitzrayim. So he was very high-minded, and now he's low-minded. He can't say anything now. It's like he's dead.
So what's Binyamin now saying?
What?
Yosef is Sod. Yehuda is...
Binyamin is also Yesod. But he's the Malchus of the Yesod, he's called. He's the kingdom of foundation. That's called Tzadik Tachton. And the interesting thing is that it's called the skin. It's called the Teret HaYesod. You even have this. When is Binyamin revealed? And the bris. When we do a bris, when we circumcise, what we're doing is we're revealing the Binyamin in each person. Because we're creating a crown on the male organ. That crown is Binyamin himself. Okay, so this requires some more explanation. He hasn't yet explained to us, which hopefully we'll do tomorrow. We're learning tomorrow. We'll get tomorrow to where he starts explaining what is this in serving God. This is all what the Arizal explains. It's all very complex and very interesting, and it has a lot of in the end physical anatomical references. Some people find maybe a little uncomfortable or discomforting. It doesn't matter. The point is, you have to learn from everything. And I'm saying the point is, some of our listeners might feel a little uncomfortable. You have to learn from everything. And so we try to say this as abstractly as possible, but in the end you have to think about these things in order to come to the creative force in a person, because the creative force that we see is usually having children. That's the most creative force that we know of. The other one, and that's why, by the way, this is relatively an early mimer, relatively speaking, it's 1801. When the Midler Rebbe, when his son began explaining this, he completely lost the sexual language entirely. Yeah. And he substituted for it the relationship between a student and a teacher, instead of the relationship between a husband and a wife. And I think that he said in the end, the Midler Rebbe said, that in the end, there's a lot more detail in the relationship between a teacher and a student than there is between a husband and a wife. I can explain to you far more details in the creative process from a teacher and a student than I can from a husband and a wife. So this is interesting. He uses here the Ariz language. By the way, that's why if there's any reason why not to learn Kabbalah directly, it's this reason. That in the end it's an anatomy which also goes to the sexual anatomy. And in Chassidus, this really doesn't happen. You notice here that he also skips a lot. He assumes that you've read Eitz Chaim and you know what the Arizal said. Okay. Zeis Chanukah Sameach.
What happened on Zeis Chanukah?